Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Picture this. You're watching the security cameras when a figure appears, someone who's not supposed to be there. You rush to confront them only to discover they are not human at all. The chilling truth behind this entity will leave you frozen in fear. But the real question is, who or what is haunting this hotel? You won't believe what happens next. Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark and support the channel so we can bring you even more spine-tingling tales. Ethan Harris had never imagined his life would bring him here, to the worn-down, eerie halls of the Crescent Manor. Situated in the heart of New Orleans' historic district, the hotel stood as a ghostly reminder of a bygone era, built in the roaring 1920s, but now deteriorating under the weight of time. Its once grand marble floors were scuffed, and the gilded wallpaper peeled in some areas as if it too were desperate to escape the rot beneath. Yet, despite its crumbling exterior, there was something strangely compelling about it. The hotel's charm lay not in its polished surface, but in its memories, the dark, forgotten corners where secrets lay buried. It was a place where the air hummed with whispers of the past, haunting the present like a forgotten melody. Ethan wasn't here by choice, at least not in the way he had once envisioned his life. A personal tragedy had shattered his previous existence, a grief too raw, too deep to share. He had fled from his old life, seeking anonymity in the shadows of the Crescent Manor. His new role as a night security guard was as distant from the past he had fled as possible, a job where no one knew his name or cared about the broken pieces of his soul. And so, he found himself alone in the belly of this haunted hotel, its vast, cold halls stretching into darkness, echoing with his own footsteps as he walked, hour after endless hour, through the empty corridors. Sleep was a stranger to Ethan. The insomnia, the mind's restless tossing and turning, was like a cruel companion that followed him into the night. His body longed for rest, but his mind refused to quiet, plagued by thoughts he could not silence. The nights in the hotel were worse than the days. With no guests to check in or out, the hallways felt even more desolate, the silence oppressive. The hum of old machinery, the creaks of the building settling, became almost oppressive. He was left alone with his own thoughts, and sometimes it felt as though the hotel itself was awake, watching him, waiting. The hotel had an unnerving presence, something intangible but ever-present. It wasn't long before Ethan began to notice things, small at first, that didn't make sense, things that chilled him to the bone. It started with the flickering lights. At first, he blamed the old wiring, the age of the building. But it didn't stop. Sometimes, the lights would flash on and off in the long hallways, as if something was toying with him, testing his patience. The first time it happened, Ethan had been making his rounds, checking the back stairwell, and when he turned the corner, he saw the lights pulse like the heartbeat of the hotel itself. It was unsettling, to say the least. Then there were the whispers. It wasn't the wind, as he tried to convince himself. It was a soft murmur that seemed to come from the walls, the floors, the very air he breathed. He would stand perfectly still, listening intently, trying to decipher what was being said, but the whispers always stopped when he focused on them, leaving him with only the heavy silence and the feeling that something was watching. The hairs on the back of his neck would rise, and a cold, bone-deep chill would sweep through the air, as if something cold had passed by him. It felt personal, as if whatever was whispering wanted him to hear, to understand something, but never gave enough away to make sense of it. Then came the cold spots. Ethan first encountered the coldness on the second floor. He was walking down the hallway when, without warning, the temperature around him dropped. It was sudden, like walking into a freezer. His breath misted in front of him and a shiver ran down his spine. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and dust, but the cold was unnatural. He stepped back, bewildered, feeling the hairs on his neck prickle as if a presence had brushed by him. There was no source for the cold, no air conditioning vent, no window left ajar, just a heavy, suffocating cold that made him question his sanity. The building's security cameras were no help. They had been installed to monitor the hotel's renovations and ensure safety for the few remaining guests who occasionally wandered in, but they seemed to capture more than anyone had anticipated. As Ethan watched the footage in the small security office, he saw things that didn't belong. Shadows moved across the screen, figures too faint to fully see but enough to unsettle him. He would rewind the footage, playing it back frame by frame, trying to understand what he had missed, but each time the shadows seemed to disappear the moment he focused on them. It was impossible to ignore, but Ethan tried. He buried the unease, convinced his exhaustion was clouding his judgment. But the feeling never left. One night, as Ethan was finishing up his rounds and heading back to the security office, he was stopped by a familiar voice. Omar, the head of security, a man who had worked at Crescent Manor for years, was leaning against the counter. His dark eyes watched Ethan with a knowing look, a hint of something unspoken in his gaze. Omar had seen things. Ethan had no doubt about that. The older man's weathered face spoke volumes about his years spent in this cursed hotel. But what Ethan didn't realize was how much Omar had seen and how much he was willing to share if only Ethan would listen. "Don't get too comfortable, kid," Omar said one evening, his voice low and gravelly like he was speaking from some faraway place. "You think it's just an old hotel. It's not. This place has got a past, a history that it doesn't like to let go of. And some of that history, well, it doesn't like to stay buried." Ethan chuckled awkwardly, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, sure, I've heard the ghost stories." Omar's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a thin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's not a joke, kid. I've seen things that don't make sense. People who checked in but never checked out. Room 313, it's cursed. Don't go in there at night. Just trust me." Ethan shrugged, shaking his head in disbelief. He didn't believe in ghosts, not really. It was just a bunch of old stories, fueled by imagination and fear. But as the days went by and the strange occurrences multiplied, he began to wonder if there was more truth in Omar's words than he had cared to admit. The night was still young, and Ethan's shift had just begun. But as he walked through the dimly lit halls of the Crescent Manor, the hotel seemed to come alive around him. The flickering lights, the whispers, the cold spots, each moment only deepened the mystery and the unease that grew within him. Something or someone was waiting in the shadows, and as the clock ticked on, Ethan realized that the hotel, with all its ancient, dark secrets, had no intention of letting him go so easily. The night shift had only just begun. This sets the foundation for an unsettling and immersive story. The next part would build on the eerie experiences and dive deeper into the mysteries of the Crescent Manor. Let me know if you'd like to continue. The Crescent Manor had become an all-encompassing entity in Ethan's life. At first, he thought it would just be a way to escape the past, to disappear into the shadows of a decaying building with no one to ask questions, no one to see the cracks in his soul. But as the weeks passed, the hotel started to feel different. The quiet seemed to stretch on forever, and the walls, once welcoming in their musty familiarity, now seemed to close in around him. It started with the objects, little things at first. His desk lamp would be turned off when he was certain he had left it on. A chair would be moved across the floor, ever so slightly, as if someone had been sitting in it. It seemed harmless, even amusing, but the more it happened, the more unsettling it became. Ethan would go about his rounds, and every now and then he would return to find things shifted ever so slightly out of place, as though the hotel had a mind of its own. But it wasn't just objects, it was the sound. Faint, distant, and strange, it would come to him in the dead of night. The sound of children laughing. It wasn't loud, but it was constant. Sometimes it felt like it was coming from the walls themselves, like the sound was embedded deep in the very bones of the hotel. The laughter didn't belong there, not in this empty, cold hotel. Ethan tried to dismiss it, but the longer he stayed in the hotel, the more persistent the sounds became. The laughter would echo through the hallways, growing louder at times, almost as if someone was deliberately trying to get his attention. But when he would rush to the source, there would be nothing, just the hollow emptiness of the hall, lit by dim, flickering lights. The shadows were next. They didn't move like the shadows of ordinary objects. They shifted in unnatural ways, sometimes too fast, sometimes too slow. One moment, Ethan would be walking through the hallway, and the next, he would see something flicker in the corner of his eye, a fleeting figure darting across his path. The shadows never made sense. They never followed the rules of light and dark. They seemed to defy logic, to move in ways that didn't belong to this world. At first, Ethan tried to reason with himself. It was the fatigue, the long hours, the isolation of the night. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just his mind playing tricks. The hotel was changing him. He could feel it. The creeping dread, the sense that something was waiting, watching, listening. He couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was alive in ways he didn't understand. Then came the cameras. Ethan had always dismissed the camera footage as another part of his job, something to review in case of incidents, a mundane task he'd grown accustomed to. But it was the footage of room 313 that first caught his attention. The camera had been positioned in the hall just outside, offering a perfect view of the doorway. Ethan had been reviewing a set of images when something strange caught his eye. At first, it was barely noticeable, a fleeting figure, moving swiftly through the wall. He rewound the footage, played it again, and this time it was clearer. The figure wasn't human, not entirely. It was like watching a ghost walk through the walls of the hotel. But this figure wasn't just any specter, it was a woman. Her form was vague, ethereal, like the image of someone long lost to time, but there was something eerily familiar about her. She wore a vintage dress, the kind that would have been fashionable in the 1920s, and her eyes, those piercing green eyes, seemed to stare right through the camera, as if she was looking directly at Ethan, waiting for him to notice her. The sight sent a chill down his spine. He couldn't explain it, couldn't fathom how or why it happened. But there she was, unmistakably, her image clear for a few fleeting seconds before vanishing into thin air. That was the moment Ethan knew. He wasn't just dealing with an old, run-down hotel. The Crescent Manor was hiding something far darker, far older than he could have imagined. The spirits that lingered here were not mere echoes. They were alive, and they were waiting for him. One night, while reviewing the camera footage again, Ethan spotted her once more. This time she wasn't in the walls. She was outside the building, standing just beyond the front doors, staring into the darkness that lay beyond. She had that same unsettling smile, serene calm, but somehow full of malice, as if she knew something Ethan didn't. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the front door. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline surging through his veins, pushing him forward. But when he swung open the door, the street outside was empty. The mist rolled through the streets of New Orleans, but there was no woman, just the oppressive fog curling and shifting like something alive. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his pulse racing as he scanned the area. She had been right there just moments ago, but now there was nothing. He stepped back into the hotel, his hands trembling. What was happening to him? Was he losing his mind, or was something far worse at work? The building felt colder now. The walls seemed to grow tighter, as if the hotel itself were closing in around him. His heart beat louder in his ears as the weight of his surroundings pressed down on him. He didn't know what to believe anymore. The woman outside the building was the first of many encounters. As Ethan continued his work, the hotel's dark past began to unfold before him. The woman, he learned, was not the only soul trapped within the hotel's walls. There were others lost, forgotten, their stories buried under layers of time and neglect. Ethan's investigation into the hotel's history led him to the original owner, Wallace Morrow, a man whose name was as much a part of Crescent Manor's dark legacy as the building itself. Morrow had been obsessed with the hotel's original charm, its vintage allure, its link to the past. But what Ethan uncovered was far more sinister than he could have imagined. Wallace Morrow wasn't just a businessman. He had been involved in occult rituals, dark, twisted ceremonies that blurred the line between life and death. His obsession with preserving the hotel's charm went beyond aesthetics. It was part of a far deeper, more dangerous plan. Ethan discovered that Morrow had made a pact, one that tied the souls of the hotel's former guests to the building itself. Those who checked in and never checked out were not just victims of crime or misfortune, they were sacrifices. The realization hit Ethan like a ton of bricks. The hotel wasn't just haunted, it was a prison for the souls of those who had been trapped there by Morrow's dark rituals. And now, the hotel was trying to claim him too. The more Ethan uncovered, the more the line between reality and the supernatural began to blur. The spirits were not just residual echoes of the past. They were active, angry, and searching for release. And the more Ethan dug into the hotel's history, the more he realized that he was being drawn into their world, whether he wanted to be or not. The Crescent Manor was more than just a building. It was a living, breathing entity, and it wasn't going to let Ethan leave so easily. As the days passed, the chill of Crescent Manor seemed to grow deeper, more suffocating. Ethan felt it with every passing hour, an ever-tightening grip that pulled him into the depths of something much darker than he could have ever imagined. The hotel was no longer just an abandoned relic. It had become a living, breathing presence, its walls echoing with an unseen force, a pulse beneath the floorboards, an awareness that wasn't there before. The whispers, once faint and fleeting, grew louder, more persistent. They weren't just random noises anymore. It felt personal. Ethan would be standing at the front desk, eyes fixed on the clock, the silence pressing down on him like a thick blanket when he would hear it, his name soft but unmistakable. Ethan. It came from the direction of the lobby where no one was standing. His heart would stutter in his chest, and his gaze would dart around the room, searching for the source. But there was nothing, no one there. just the dim glow of the old, flickering lamps that lined the walls, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. The first time it happened, he thought he had imagined it, but it continued, whispers in the hallways, echoing through the empty rooms at night, murmurs in the corners of his mind when he tried to sleep. The cold spots were worse now, far more intense than before. They weren't just brief moments of chill anymore, they seemed to follow him. The temperature would drop abruptly, a biting frost that nipped at his skin, but when he would turn to look, there was nothing. No open window, no vent blowing cold air. It was as though the hotel itself was breathing a cold, dead breath right against his neck. It was suffocating. The warmth of his own body seemed to fight against it, but it was futile. He'd walk down the long, twisting corridors and feel the bite of the cold as if the very air around him was frozen. The feeling never lasted long enough for him to make sense of it, yet it stayed with him, seeping into his bones. As if the cold was a warning, the cameras grew more active, showing more than just static. The once familiar footage, which had always shown only empty hallways and the occasional passerby, now captured strange, unsettling images. Figures appeared in the frames, walking by windows and through doors that should have been locked. They moved with an unnatural stillness, like shadows detached from the world, visible only through the lens. When Ethan reviewed the footage, his hands would tremble as he watched the figure of a man, or what he thought was a man, pass by one of the front windows. The figure seemed solid, but when he played the footage frame by frame, there was nothing to account for the dark shape. No sound, no movement, just an image. It was always fleeting, like a shadow crossing a stage, visible for only a moment, then gone before he could grasp it. Ethan tried to make sense of it. Was it a trick of the light, a fault in the camera's wiring? But deep down he knew it wasn't. Something was happening. The very fabric of the hotel seemed to be shifting, unraveling. What had once been mere signs, little unexplained incidents, was now a full-blown assault on his senses. One evening, as he sat alone in the security room, the whispering again, his name, Ethan. This time it was followed by a breath, soft and shallow. He turned quickly, heart racing, but the room was empty. He ran his hand over his face, trying to suppress the panic that rose in his chest. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. That was when he saw her again, the woman, the one who had appeared in the footage, the one he had seen outside the hotel. She was standing in the doorway, just out of reach of the security cameras. Her figure was soft, translucent, but unmistakably present. The smile, serene, unsettling, as if she knew something he didn't, stayed frozen on her face. Ethan jumped up from his chair, his heart pounding in his throat. He ran toward the door, but as he swung it open, the woman was gone. The street outside was still shrouded in thick fog, the streetlights barely illuminating the path ahead. But there was no trace of her, nothing but the low, ominous hum of the city. His breath came in ragged bursts, his pulse hammering in his ears. This wasn't normal. None of it was. It wasn't until the next night that Ethan would begin to piece together the truth behind the woman. A guest had checked into the hotel earlier that evening. An older woman with graying hair and a quiet, almost melancholic demeanor. Her name was Catherine, and she had requested a room on the 3rd floor. She had mentioned something during check-in, something that caused Ethan to pause. "I used to stay here years ago," Catherine had said, her voice barely above a whisper, "with my family. Back when the hotel had a different charm." Ethan had smiled politely, not thinking much of it. But when he saw her again in the hallway later that evening, the conversation resurfaced. He approached her cautiously. "I couldn't help but notice you mentioned staying here before. What was it like back then?" he asked, trying to sound casual though his heart was pounding in his chest. Catherine hesitated, her eyes flickering to the far end of the hallway as if searching for something hidden. She looked back at him, and Ethan saw the weight of the memories in her gaze. "I remember it as a place full of life. We had a good time, but not all of us left." Ethan frowned, confusion creeping in. "What do you mean?" "I saw something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something I couldn't explain. Something terrible happened in room 313. A murder. It was covered up, of course. No one talked about it, but I saw it and I never forgot. I couldn't get away from it." Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. Room 313. That cursed room. He had heard rumors about it from Omar, but he hadn't wanted to believe. Catherine's words confirmed everything. The woman, the one he had seen in the footage, was not a mere figment of his imagination. She was real. She was part of something far darker. Catherine went on to explain that she had witnessed a violent event during her stay, an argument between two guests that escalated into something far worse. She had been a child at the time, and what she had seen, what she had overheard, had been enough to haunt her for years. The man who had been murdered had been in room 313. No one ever spoke of it, but she had seen it happen. The hotel had covered it up. But the death had never truly been erased. It lingered. And now the spirits of those who had died here, those whose lives had been stolen by the horrors of the past, were waking up. As Ethan listened, the pieces started to fall into place. The whispers, the cold spots, the shadows that moved without cause, it was all connected. The hotel, its history, its curses, they were all tied to the souls trapped within its walls, and they were angry. The spirits had been trapped, bound by Morau's rituals, left to wander the halls, seeking something, revenge, answers, or perhaps release. But as the events grew darker, Ethan realized that these spirits weren't just waiting to be heard. They were fighting to escape. They were fighting to bring him into their world, to make him one of them. And the hotel, Crescent Manor, was their prison. Ethan's footsteps echoed down the dark corridor as he made his way back to the security room. The sense of urgency, of impending doom, was suffocating. The hotel was not just a place. It was a vessel, a gateway to something far worse. The spirits that had been unleashed were only the beginning. Ethan had avoided it for weeks. Room 313, the infamous room that had been whispered about more times than he cared to count. Every time he walked past it, there was a weight in the air, a sense of dread that pulled at him, warning him not to go inside. He had been told stories, rumors, really, about the room. Omar had spoken about it more than once, his voice filled with a peculiar reverence and fear. "Don't go in there, kid," Omar had said, eyes wide, his face pale with the memory. "It's not just a room, it's the heart of the curse. It's where everything started." But now, after everything he had witnessed, everything he had learned, the truth was no longer something he could avoid. The hotel was alive with ghosts, with memories too dark to be forgotten. The spirits that lingered, trapped in the hotel's decaying walls, were restless, angry, and desperate. And Ethan knew that the only way to truly understand what was happening, to grasp the full weight of the evil that had taken root in Crescent Manor, was to face room 313. That night, with the hallways empty and the air heavy with the stench of mildew and forgotten time, Ethan approached the door. The old brass handle felt cold under his fingers as he turned it, the door creaking loudly as he pushed it open. The room beyond was dimly lit by the faint light filtering through a single, grimy window. It was the same room Omar had warned him about, the one no one ever stayed in, the one that had remained locked for years. Inside, it was exactly as he had imagined it, ancient and forsaken. The room looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades. Dust coated every surface, the furniture old and weathered, as if time had decided to bypass this place entirely. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of something long past its prime. But there was something else in the room, something intangible, like a weight pressing down on him, pushing him deeper into the past. He moved further into the room, his breath shallow, heart racing. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as if they were alive, groaning with the effort of holding up the weight of the building's haunted history. His eyes scanned the room, landing on a small wooden desk in the corner. The desk was cluttered with old papers, faded photographs, and books, thick leather-bound journals with cracked spines and yellowing pages. Ethan's fingers trembled as he approached the desk. His curiosity fought against the growing sense of unease gnawing at his insides. He picked up the closest journal, its leather surface cold to the touch. The first page was dated October 5th, 1923. Wallace Morrow's handwriting was scrawled across the page, the ink faded but still legible. He flipped through the journal, reading fragments of entries that spoke of the hotel's restoration, of a plan so dark it made his stomach churn. Wallace had not just been interested in refurbishing the Crescent Manor. He had been obsessed with it, convinced that the hotel was a nexus of spiritual energy, a place where the dead could be bound to the living world. The renovation was not just about bricks and mortar. It was a ritual, a dark pact. Wallace believed that by using the energy of the building, he could trap the souls of the dead, forcing them to stay within its walls, where they could be used to fuel the hotel's power. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The more he read, the more he realized that the ghosts were not just accidents, they were prisoners, bound by Morrow's twisted beliefs and rituals. Each death had been part of a larger plan, and the hotel was the prison where the souls were kept. But there was more. The journals described an even darker ritual, one that had been conducted in room 313. It was there that Wallace had performed the ultimate sacrifice, a ritual so vile that it had sealed the fate of the hotel and its inhabitants. Wallace had used the death of a woman he had loved, to complete the pact. The words were clear: Sylvia, Wallace's lover. Her name, written in the journal, sent a cold shiver through Ethan's spine. He felt a presence behind him before he even heard the footsteps. A sudden cold filled the room, far colder than the natural chill of the building. Ethan's heart raced as he spun around, his eyes wide, his breath coming out in short, frantic gasps. And there she was, Sylvia. She stood in the doorway, her figure pale and ethereal. Her eyes, those piercing green eyes, locked onto his. The room seemed to darken around her, the air thickening with her presence. Her hair, once dark and flowing, hung around her face like a shadow, and her vintage dress, worn and tattered, fluttered despite the stillness of the room. Her lips curled into a smile, but it was not a smile of joy. It was twisted, almost pained, as though her smile had been frozen in time, an expression that had not changed since her death. Ethan's blood ran cold. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The woman before him was no mere ghost. She was a specter bound by the same forces that had trapped the souls of all the others in this place. And her death had been part of something far darker. "You shouldn't be here." Sylvia's voice was soft, but there was an unsettling power in it, a force that made Ethan's legs feel weak beneath him. Who are you?" Ethan's voice trembled. He could barely comprehend what was happening. She looked so real, too real. "I am Sylvia. I was Wallace's lover." Her eyes flashed with bitterness, her voice steady but laden with sorrow. "And my death, it was not an accident. It was a sacrifice." Ethan took a step back, his hands shaking as he gripped the desk for support. The air around him felt like it was closing in. "A sacrifice," he whispered, his mind struggling to keep up. Sylvia nodded slowly, her expression becoming darker, more distant. "Wallace. He used my death to seal the pact, to bind the souls of the dead to this place. He thought it would give him power, make the hotel run forever. But what he didn't realize was that it would curse us all, trap us here." Her gaze softened for a moment, and Ethan could see the pain in her eyes. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to be part of his twisted plans. But once the ritual was complete, once my soul was bound to the hotel, there was no escape." The cold intensified, and the room felt as though it were collapsing in on Ethan. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Sylvia's ghostly presence was not just an apparition. She was a victim, a soul trapped in a prison she could never escape. And now Ethan understood the full extent of Wallace's madness. The spirits were not simply wandering. Like Sylvia, they were prisoners of Wallace's greed, his obsession with power and immortality. The deaths that had occurred in the hotel, the people who had vanished without a trace, each one had been part of a ritual that had chained their souls to this place. You're all trapped," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. Sylvia's expression turned sorrowful. "We are, but it's not just us. There are others, more souls, more deaths. And as long as the hotel stands, they will never be free." Suddenly, Sylvia took a step forward, her eyes locking onto Ethan's. "And now you are part of it too. You've uncovered the truth, but you're too late. The hotel won't let you leave. It never lets anyone leave." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The room seemed to spin around him as Sylvia's figure began to fade, her last words lingering in the air like an echo. "There is no escape, Ethan. Not for you. Not for anyone. The hotel has you now." With that, she vanished, leaving Ethan standing in the middle of the room, his body frozen with fear. The weight of what he had just learned pressed down on him like a crushing force. He had thought the hotel was just a place, a haunted relic of the past. But now he knew the truth. Crescent Manor was no mere building. It was a prison, and the spirits that lingered within its walls were not just trapped by circumstance. They were imprisoned by the very energy that Wallace Morrow had harnessed to bind them there. And the worst part was that Ethan was no different. He was already part of their world, and there was no turning back. The nights were no longer quiet for Ethan. The weight of the hotel's curse pressed heavily upon him, growing more suffocating with each passing hour. The walls of Crescent Manor no longer felt like simple walls. Now they felt like a cage, a place that held him captive with no hope of escape. What had started as a job to escape the ghosts of his past had turned into a nightmare, one that he couldn't wake up from. His body was starting to betray him. The fatigue had always been there, creeping in with each sleepless night, but now it was different. It was more than just physical exhaustion. His skin felt cold, as if the chill of the hotel had settled deep into his bones. The migraines were constant, sharp, and persistent, stabbing into his temples like daggers. His hands shook uncontrollably as he reached for his coffee in the mornings, the once smooth motions now filled with jerky, erratic movements. He hadn't slept in days, but the exhaustion wasn't just from a lack of rest. It was the toll the hotel had taken on him, the toll of being slowly consumed by its curse. His mind, once sharp and focused, was becoming a haze of confusion. He couldn't trust his senses anymore. Was the shadow moving at the end of the hallway real? Or was it just another figment of his imagination? Was the sound of footsteps approaching his office genuine, or was it simply the building settling under its own weight? The boundaries between the living and the dead had begun to blur, and he found himself teetering on the edge of madness. At times, he could feel the spirits in the hotel, their cold, invisible hands pressing against him, reaching out to him, begging him for something he could not understand. The whispers had become more insistent, clearer, as though they were now speaking directly to him. "Help us," they would whisper, "free us." Ethan had tried to ignore them, tried to shut them out, but the more he resisted, the stronger they became. His every step seemed to echo with their voices, filling his mind with the constant hum of their desperate pleas. The fear had set in too, its sharp claws sinking deeper into his chest. The hotel was feeding on it, he knew that now. The spirits, the curse. It wasn't just random. They were using him. Ethan had become a conduit, a bridge between the living and the dead. The more terrified he became, the stronger they grew, until he was little more than a vessel for their misery. His fear was their sustenance, and he was feeding them in ways he could never have imagined. Every time his heart raced, every time his hands shook, every time he felt his sanity slipping, he was feeding the very thing that had ensnared him in this nightmare. He had to do something. He couldn't keep running. The hotel had already become part of him, its curse sinking into his very soul. But Ethan knew that the longer he stayed, the more it would consume him. It wasn't just his body and his mind that were at risk, it was his very essence. The spirits wanted him, needed him, and if he didn't find a way to fight back, they would drag him down into the darkness with them. That's when Lena came. She arrived like a shadow, a whisper in the wind that swept through the hotel's corridors, bringing with her a sense of strange comfort that Ethan hadn't known in weeks. Lena was a medium, a paranormal investigator who had heard about the disturbances at Crescent Manor. Her arrival was not by coincidence. She had been drawn here, just as Ethan had been, though she seemed far more prepared to face the horrors that lurked within the hotel. When Ethan met her, he was unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. She exuded a quiet confidence, but there was something in her eyes that hinted at the depth of her knowledge, a knowledge that Ethan feared. She was no stranger to the supernatural, no stranger to what had been happening at the hotel. She had seen this kind of thing before, had dealt with the spirits and entities that fed off the living, and she knew exactly what had happened to Crescent Manor. Lena was different from anyone Ethan had met. She didn't have the skepticism that Omar had carried, nor the dismissive attitude that most people had toward the supernatural. Lena knew what was happening. She wasn't afraid of it, and that, more than anything, frightened Ethan. Because if Lena knew what was happening, then it meant it was real, far more real than he had ever imagined. She explained it to him in soft, measured tones, her voice calm and soothing as she walked him through everything. "The spirits are using you, Ethan," Lena said, her gaze steady and piercing as she met his eyes. "They're feeding off your fear. You're their conduit. They've latched onto you, and the more you resist, the more they grow powerful." Ethan swallowed hard. The words she spoke were like a blow to the chest, each one confirming what he had felt deep inside. He had thought he was imagining things, that the fear was just a result of stress, exhaustion, but it wasn't. The spirits were real. They were real, and they were using him. "Why me?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. Why is it me they are after? Lena's gaze softened and she stepped closer to him, her presence calming, but her words were heavy. You've been chosen, not by choice, but by circumstance. The hotel's curse, the rituals that were performed here, it all ties back to you now. You've uncovered the truth, Ethan. And now the spirits know you can see them. They know you can feel them. That's why they are drawn to you. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. It wasn't just the curse of the hotel, it was him. The spirits weren't just haunting Crescent Manor, they were haunting him. And the more he resisted, the more he fought to escape, the stronger they became. They needed him to acknowledge them, to accept their presence, and in doing so, they would use him to cross over into the living world. Lena's warning cut through the air like a blade. They'll grow stronger, Ethan. The more you fear them, the more they feed. And soon, it won't just be their voices you hear. It'll be their hands, their presence. You won't be able to tell where the dead end and the living begin. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He had been feeling it already, that sense of the boundaries between the living and the dead blurring, the sense that the hotel was not just a place but a portal, a bridge between worlds. The spirits, Lena explained, were not merely trapped, they were angry. Their torment had been centuries in the making. Some were seeking revenge for what had been done to them. Others were simply lost, wandering, waiting for release from the chains that held them. But what they all had in common was the need to be acknowledged, to be seen. They needed Ethan to see them, and the more he resisted, the more they fed off his fear. You have to face them, Ethan, Lena urged him, her voice gentle but firm. You have to confront the past, confront the spirits that are trapped here. It's the only way to break the cycle. But be warned, they won't let you go easily. The hotel feeds on your fear. It feeds on the fear of the living. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He was drowning in it, the fear, the suffocating terror that had been creeping up on him since the first night he had stepped into Crescent Manor. He had been fighting it, denying it, but now he understood. The more he fought, the more he gave into it. And now, the only way out was to confront the very thing that had been haunting him from the start. As Lena's words sank in, Ethan realized that his only choice was to face the spirits, to uncover the truth behind their torment. The curse of Crescent Manor was not just a curse. It was a battle for his soul, a war between the living and the dead. And the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. The night had grown unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that seemed to swallow all sound, leaving only a suffocating silence that echoed in the depths of the Crescent Manor. It was as if the hotel itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to finally break the stillness. Ethan had been running on pure instinct for days now, his body fatigued beyond measure, his mind unraveling from the constant torment the spirits had brought to him. Yet, despite the exhaustion that clung to his every step, he was still moving, still searching for a way to end the horrors that had gripped the hotel. Lena had been his only hope. She was the one person who seemed to understand what was happening, the one person who might know how to stop it. Her knowledge of the supernatural, of the dark energies that flowed through the hotel's walls, was the key. She had convinced him to help her perform the ritual, a ritual she believed would cleanse the hotel, banish the spirits that had taken residence in its decaying heart, and sever the ties that bound them to Crescent Manor. Ethan had been hesitant, terrified of what might happen if the ritual failed, but he had no choice. He couldn't let the hotel consume him, not when the stakes had become so clear. He was already tangled in its curse, already bound to its terrible fate. The only way out was through, and Lena was the guide who could lead him through the labyrinth of darkness that had overtaken them both. But as the ritual began, something shifted. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of light, a shudder in the air, a strange shift in the temperature. Then, the very foundations of Crescent Manor seemed to groan and shift, as if the hotel itself were alive and waking up from a long slumber. The walls seemed to warp, bending and twisting like something that could no longer hold its shape. The hallways stretched impossibly long, twisting at impossible angles. The rooms, once familiar, began to change locations. Ethan turned a corner only to find that the hallway that had once led to the stairwell now led to nowhere, the door at the end of the hall opening into a brick wall. The very architecture of the hotel was turning against them. The ritual, meant to purify, was instead feeding the darkness that had long since been buried in Crescent Manor's past. Lena's voice, steady and unwavering, called out incantations from an ancient text, her hands moving with practiced grace as she sought to break the chains that held the spirits to this place. But even as her voice rang out, the air thickened with a malevolent energy, a pulse of power so dark and ancient that it shook the very core of Ethan's being. The hotel was rejecting her efforts. It wasn't just haunted, it was a creature, feeding off the ritual, growing stronger, more violent. Ethan stumbled backwards, his pulse racing. The whispers, once soft and insistent, now crescendoed into an unbearable roar. They were no longer just in his ears. They were in his mind, clawing at his thoughts, filling him with terror, with confusion. The hotel was no longer just an inanimate object. It was a being alive and conscious, and it was angry. The cold returned, far worse than before. It enveloped him, seeping into his skin, his bones, turning everything numb. His breath came out in puffs of white fog, his chest tight with the weight of unseen hands pressing down on him. He turned to Lena, desperate for answers, but she was focused. Her eyes closed in concentration, her hands tracing the air as if she could pull something from it. Then the doors slammed shut. Ethan's heart lurched in his chest as the sound reverberated through the hotel. He turned to Lena, but she had stopped chanting. Her eyes snapped open, wide with shock and fear. The room they were standing in, the once quiet, dimly lit security office, was now a chamber of madness. The floor seemed to sway beneath him, the walls stretching out of sight, as if they were being pulled into some vast, unseen void. The shadows in the corners of the room writhed and twisted, forming shapes that were too large to comprehend. And then the entity appeared. At first, it was a shadow, a figure too large, too dark to fully comprehend. But as it moved closer, the shape became clearer, more distinct. Ethan's blood ran cold as he realized what he was seeing. The spirit of Wallace Morrow was no longer just a ghost, a lingering soul trapped in the hotel. He had become something far worse, something monstrous, an entity forged from the very souls of the victims he had sacrificed in his twisted rituals. The figure of Wallace stood before them, towering and distorted, his face a grotesque mask of anguish and malice. His eyes, once a pale blue, were now black, endless pits that seemed to devour the light around him. His body was made of shadows, of smoke and fire, flickering in and out of existence as if he were not entirely of this world. But the most terrifying thing of all was the way he moved. His steps were not of the living. They were like ripples in the fabric of reality itself, distorting the air around him. "You think you can undo what I've done?" Wallace's voice echoed in Ethan's mind, deep and guttural, as though it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "This hotel is mine. I am its master. I've made it eternal, and you are nothing but an obstacle to my power." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to run to escape, but his legs felt like lead. He was frozen in place, as if the very air around him was holding him still, trapping him in the room with the entity that had once been Wallace Morrow. "You fool," Wallace continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've uncovered the truth, but you'll never escape it. I made this hotel my prison, and now you are my prisoner too. You cannot fight what I've become. You cannot fight what I've created." Ethan could feel the pull of Wallace's power, the oppressive weight of it crushing him. It was a power built on the suffering of others, a power that had twisted Wallace into something unrecognizable. The spirit of the man who had once owned Crescent Manor was gone, replaced by a monstrous force that thrived on fear, on torment, on control. And now Ethan realized it wasn't just the hotel that was cursed. It was Wallace. He had become the curse itself, a dark entity forged from the souls he had bound to this place. The hotel was nothing more than a vessel for his insatiable thirst for power. "You are nothing but a tool," Wallace snarled, his form flickering like a dying flame. "A tool to be used to feed my power." Ethan's mind raced. He had to fight. He had to find a way to stop this, stop Wallace. But every part of him screamed that it was hopeless. Wallace was no longer a man. He was a creature born of darkness, a being far beyond human understanding. And the hotel was his kingdom, his throne. Lena's voice cut through the air, shaky but resolute. "We can't defeat him like this. He's not just a ghost. He's a demon born from his own madness, and the hotel is his anchor. If we're to stop him, we need to sever his connection to the hotel." But even as she spoke, Ethan felt the power of the entity intensifying. The walls around them seemed to pulse with dark energy, the floor trembling beneath their feet. The very air seemed to be alive with malice, swirling with the dark essence of Wallace's spirit. "There is no escaping me," Wallace hissed, his voice reverberating with power. "This is my domain, and you will bow before it." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, his mind racing for a solution. He couldn't fight Wallace alone. He couldn't do this. But Lena had given him the key. The hotel was the anchor. If they could destroy the connection between Wallace and the hotel, they might have a chance. But there was one problem. The hotel was alive. And as long as it existed, Wallace's power would never fade. And now, Ethan realized with a sinking feeling, there was no escaping the darkness. Not without paying a price. The oppressive atmosphere in Crescent Manor had reached a crescendo. The hotel was no longer simply haunted. It had become a living, breathing entity, pulsing with dark energy that seemed to consume everything it touched. Each hallway twisted and contorted like a maze. The walls murmuring with whispers from the past. The floorboards groaning as if in pain. Ethan and Lena had come to a horrifying realization. The hotel itself had become an extension of Wallace's spirit, and its very foundations had been tainted by his malevolent presence. The battle for control was no longer just about stopping the spirits. It was about severing the connection between Wallace Morrow and the hotel, the anchor that held his twisted form in this realm. Every step they took toward that goal brought them closer to an inevitable confrontation, a final battle that would decide whether Crescent Manor would remain a cursed prison or be freed from its torment. Ethan's mind raced as he walked beside Lena through the hotel's eerie halls. The sound of their footsteps echoed too loudly in the otherwise silent corridors, the weight of their mission pressing on them both. Ethan felt like a man walking toward his own execution, each breath more labored than the last. The spirits had grown restless. Their whispers had become louder, more frantic, as if they too sensed that something was changing. The air was thick with an unnatural charge, an energy that vibrated in Ethan's chest, settling under his skin like a burning fever. "We have to do this," Lena said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with the faintest trace of fear. "The spirits, they're feeding off Wallace's power, and the longer we wait, the stronger they get. We can't let them turn on us. We need to finish what we started." Her words were a reminder of the danger that surrounded them, but Ethan didn't need reminding. He had felt the power of Wallace's entity firsthand. He had felt the dark presence that loomed over him every time he stepped into the hotel. It wasn't just the fear of being trapped that plagued him now. It was the fear of what he might become if they failed. The spirits, Wallace's spirits, had already taken so much from him. They had already twisted his reality, and he feared that if they lost this battle, he would become just another soul, another lost ghost in Crescent Manor's labyrinth of torment. Lena led him to the heart of the hotel, the library. It was here, among the dusty shelves filled with ancient tomes, that they would begin the final ritual. The original journals of Wallace Morrow had been preserved, a testament to his madness, and within their pages lay the key to ending the curse. But Lena knew that this ritual would be unlike any other they had performed. It wasn't simply a matter of releasing the spirits. It was about binding Wallace's dark spirit to the hotel, trapping him in a prison of his own making. Ethan stood beside Lena as she carefully unrolled the ancient scroll that contained the counter-ritual. She had studied it for days, memorizing every word, every symbol, understanding the balance of power it required. The words were written in a language that Ethan couldn't understand, but the weight of them pressed down on him. It was as though the words themselves were alive, capable of reaching into his soul and drawing out his deepest fears. "I'm going to need you to be ready," Lena said, her eyes scanning the journal as she marked certain passages. "When the ritual starts, the spirits will fight back. Wallace will fight back. We need to act quickly." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with anxiety. He knew that their success depended on his ability to help Lena, to stay focused in the face of the overwhelming terror that was sure to come. But the price of this ritual was something neither of them had fully grasped. The curse of Crescent Manor wasn't something that could simply be erased. It had become a part of them, a part of the very fabric of their being. The ritual would take everything from them. As Lena began to chant the incantation, the air around them thickened, swirling with a presence so powerful that it seemed to warp the very room. Ethan could feel the temperature plummet, the walls groaning as if they were alive. The faint glow of the candles flickered violently, casting long, twisting shadows on the walls, and then the whispers returned. Only now they were louder, more urgent, almost deafening. "Ethan," Lena's voice was strained, her focus never wavering. "We need to bind Wallace's spirit. The journals say that to stop him, we need to make him face his own darkness, his greed, his obsession. He's made this hotel his prison, and now we make it his tomb." But even as Lena spoke, the hotel seemed to fight back. The floor beneath them trembled, the walls shaking violently as if the very foundations of Crescent Manor were screaming. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken, the air thick with dread, as if the hotel itself was aware of what they were trying to do. It was more than a building, it was a monster, and it was fighting to survive. In that moment, the door to the library slammed shut, and the room was plunged into total darkness. The whispers reached a fever pitch, overwhelming Ethan's senses. His vision blurred, his skin prickled with the sensation of invisible hands brushing against him. He could hear footsteps. No, not footsteps. Something dragging, something heavy, something ancient and powerful moving through the dark. And then he saw it. Wallace Morrow, or what remained of him. The figure appeared in front of them, its form flickering in and out of reality like an illusion, like something caught between worlds. His once human face was twisted in agony, his eyes dark pits that seemed to suck the light from the room. His body was a grotesque mass of shadows and smoke, flickering with an unnatural energy that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. He was no longer just a man, he was something far worse. A creature born from the souls he had consumed, a monster that existed only to feed on the living. "You think you can stop me?" Wallace's voice was not just heard but felt. It reverberated in Ethan's chest, shaking him to the core. "I made this place my kingdom. You cannot defeat me. You cannot erase what I have become." Ethan's blood ran cold as Wallace's figure seemed to swell in size, growing more monstrous with each passing second. The air grew heavier, thick with the weight of his presence. It felt as though the very room was being sucked into a vortex and Ethan was powerless to stop it. But Lena did not falter. She continued chanting, her voice steady despite the chaos that surrounded them. She had to hold on, she had to finish the ritual. This was the only way to sever the connection between Wallace and the hotel, to stop the entity from consuming them all. The floor beneath them cracked open, and Ethan could feel the very fabric of reality beginning to tear. The spirits, trapped in the hotel for so long, were now awake, their violent energy feeding into Wallace's form. Ethan felt their presence surge, clawing at him, trying to drag him down into their darkness. He could hear their cries, their desperate pleas for release, and he understood. They were not just victims, they were also prisoners trapped in Wallace's twisted design. But Lena's voice rang out, clear and powerful, cutting through the cacophony of whispers and screams. "Face your own darkness, Wallace. Face the pain you caused, the souls you consumed. You are nothing but a shadow of your former self." Wallace screamed, the sound shaking the room, as if the very walls were splitting apart. The air grew cold, colder than Ethan had ever felt it before, as if the room was frozen in time. The shadows around Wallace writhed and screamed in agony, and for a moment Ethan could see them. Other faces, other souls, all trapped within him, their tortured expressions frozen in eternal torment. And then with a final, deafening roar, Wallace's form collapsed in on itself, his body crumbling into smoke and dust. The shadows disappeared, the weight of his presence lifted, and the room was plunged into silence. Lena collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Ethan stood there, his heart still racing, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The hotel was no longer shaking. The whispers had stopped. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air for so long was gone. But the price had been steep. They had severed Wallace's connection to the hotel, but at a cost neither of them could ever fully understand. The spirits were gone, but so was a part of themselves. The ritual had bound them to the hotel, to its curse, in ways that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The final confrontation had ended, but Crescent Manor was still there, its dark past lingering in the corners of their minds. And as Ethan looked at Lena, he realized that while they had won, the battle was never truly over. The ritual had begun to wind toward its conclusion, yet the world around Ethan seemed to fracture, twisting and unraveling at the edges. The dim glow of candlelight cast eerie, shifting shadows along the crumbling walls of Crescent Manor, which had once felt like a prison of haunted pasts. Now, as Lena's chanting echoed through the vast, decaying halls, the hotel seemed to pulse with an energy all its own. It was as if the very building were alive, breathing in time with the words of the incantation, exhaling in waves of cold air that cut through Ethan's skin. They had come so far, had fought so hard to free the souls trapped in the hotel. And now, in these final moments as the ritual neared its climax, Ethan was struck by a cold realization. A realization so deep, so unsettling that it froze the blood in his veins. The decision was his. It was Lena who had first noticed it. The way the walls of Crescent Manor seemed to bend, stretching like taffy, as though the very fabric of reality itself was being torn apart. She had warned him that the ritual might come at a terrible cost, but Ethan hadn't fully understood what she meant until now. He had thought the ritual was meant to release the trapped souls, to free them from Wallace's twisted grip. But something was wrong, deeply wrong. Lena was kneeling, her voice growing weaker, her chant faltering as the energy in the room surged and spiraled. Her eyes darted around in confusion and her hands trembled as she clutched the journal that held the final incantations. "Ethan," she gasped, her voice strained with fear. "It's not what we thought." Ethan's heart pounded as he rushed to her side. "What do you mean? We've almost done it. We're so close." "No." Lena shook her head, her eyes wide with horror. "The souls, they were never meant to be freed. They were never supposed to leave this place. They were part of something far greater, something far darker than Wallace's will. By releasing them, we may doom the world." The words hung in the air like a curse. Ethan felt the weight of them pressing down on his chest, choking him, stealing the breath from his lungs. He took a step back, the room spinning around him. What had they done? What had he done? They had believed they were freeing the souls of the dead, giving them peace, but now he realized the truth. This was never about peace. It was about power. The souls weren't trapped by Wallace's greed. They had been part of a greater, more sinister force, a force that had been watching, waiting for the moment when they would be released. And that moment had arrived. Ethan's mind raced as the implications of Lena's words began to sink in. The hotel had been built on something ancient, something evil. The spirits weren't just prisoners, they were vessels, containments for a far darker power that had been bound to the hotel long before Wallace's time. And now that power was stirring, waking up from its long, forced slumber. "We need to stop this," Ethan said, his voice hoarse with fear. "We need to reverse the ritual." Lena's eyes darkened with an expression of both guilt and resignation. "It's too late for that, Ethan. The ritual is already in motion. The souls are already waking. There's only one way to stop it now." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What? What do we do?" Lena's face softened, but there was no warmth in it. Only the grim acceptance of what she had come to understand. "The price, Ethan. The price of freeing them is a sacrifice. One of us must stay behind to keep the ritual going. One of us must remain here in this place forever." The words hit Ethan like a slap across the face. His mind screamed for him to fight back, to find another way. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't let one of them stay. But the truth was undeniable. The ritual was far too powerful to be stopped now, and the only way to ensure the safety of those still alive, the only way to prevent the release of the darkness that had been trapped here for so long, was to make the ultimate sacrifice. A horrible silence stretched between them, the weight of the decision suffocating the air. Ethan could feel the gravity of the choice hanging over him, threatening to crush him under its oppressive weight. He looked at Lena, his mind swirling with disbelief, desperation, and confusion. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in a daze. I can't leave you here. You can't do this alone." But Lena's gaze was unwavering. Her eyes, full of determination, seemed to burn with a light that cut through the terror clouding Ethan's mind. "Ethan, we don't have a choice. You've already done so much. You fought through this nightmare, but this is where it ends. The only way to contain the souls, to keep them from unleashing the darkness, is to sacrifice one of us. And I'm the only one who can do it." Ethan's knees buckled under the weight of her words. He couldn't breathe. His throat tightened, his vision blurred with tears that refused to fall. He couldn't lose Lena, not after everything. She was his last anchor to the world he had once known, the only person who had been with him through this nightmare from the beginning. And now she was asking him to let her go. Lena stepped toward him, her hands reaching for his. She pulled him close, her voice low and steady as she whispered, "You have to live, Ethan. You have to live. You've done everything you could. You fought for the souls trapped here, and now I will fight for you. I will give you the chance to leave this place, to rebuild." Ethan's heart shattered as the weight of her words finally sank in. He couldn't bear to look at her, couldn't bear to see the finality in her eyes. But deep down, he knew she was right. The ritual had to be completed, and if one of them didn't remain, the darkness would be free to ravage the world. There was no other way. With a trembling hand, he cupped her face, his fingers brushing against her cold skin. "Lena, don't make me do this." But it was already too late. The ritual was drawing to its end. The final incantation rang through the air, louder and louder, a booming pulse that shook the foundations of Crescent Manor. The hotel itself groaned, its walls cracking as the spirits within screamed in agony and joy. They were free, but the cost was irreversible. Lena smiled softly, her eyes filled with love, sorrow, and a deep, unspoken understanding. "It's already done, Ethan. It's time. Let me go." And then she stepped back, her body dissolving into the air like mist, her form disappearing into the darkness that had consumed Crescent Manor. Ethan stood there, frozen, as the echoes of the ritual reverberated through the hotel. The souls were no longer prisoners, and yet they were still bound. The darkness, however, had not been released. It had been contained, trapped forever within the walls of Crescent Manor. But the price had been paid. Ethan staggered backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had lost Lena. And yet in her final act of bravery she had saved him, saved them all. Crescent Manor was no longer a prison for the lost souls, but it was still a place of darkness, a place where the echoes of the past would never truly fade. And Ethan, left standing in the wreckage of the hotel, knew that he would never be the same again. The silence was deafening. After the ritual had been completed, after the sacrifice had been made, the hotel, Crescent Manor, seemed to hold its breath. The cold that had once gripped the building, suffocating every inch of its being, had lifted, replaced by an eerie stillness that hung in the air like smoke. Ethan stood in the heart of the ruin, his body numb, his mind reeling from the events that had unfolded over the past few days. The weight of the sacrifice, Lena's sacrifice, pressed down on him, crushing him under its unrelenting force. The world had shifted, and in that shift, Ethan had been irrevocably changed. He could feel it deep within his bones, a part of him lost to the shadows of Crescent Manor, and yet another part of him was free. Free from the darkness that had haunted him, free from the grip of the spirits that had once filled the hotel. But as the realization of his freedom settled within him, So did the understanding that nothing had truly been restored. Nothing was whole again. The final battle had been more than just the clash between the living and the dead. It had been a battle for Ethan's soul, for his very existence. Lena's last act had been one of unimaginable bravery, a selflessness that had saved him and, in a way, saved the world from the horrors that Crescent Manor harbored. But in the aftermath, the cost of that peace became clear. Ethan's gaze wandered over the wreckage of the hotel. The walls, once adorned with the elegance of a bygone era, now lay crumbled, charred, and cracked. The grand chandelier that had once illuminated the halls with a soft, golden light had fallen to the floor, its delicate crystals shattered into 1,000 pieces. The air felt thick with the remnants of the ritual, the traces of power that had been unleashed, the lingering presence of the spirits that had been freed. But even in the midst of the destruction, Ethan knew that the curse of Crescent Manor had not been entirely broken. It had been contained, yes, but the legacy of the hotel, the evil that had festered there for decades, could never truly be erased. The spirits that had once inhabited the hotel were no longer prisoners of Wallace's twisted will, but their presence lingered like ghosts that refused to fade away. As Ethan walked through the wreckage, his mind replaying the events of the past, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The spirits, the souls of those who had died in this cursed place, were still there, just beyond the veil, their presence heavy in the air. He could hear them, their whispers faint but persistent, calling to him from the shadows. He had freed them, but he hadn't given them peace. They were lost, adrift in a world they no longer belonged to, their pain echoing through the hotel, through him. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on Ethan as he approached the main lobby, the once grand center of Crescent Manor now reduced to a decaying husk. He paused at the doorway, his hand resting on the broken frame. His heart ached with the realization that the battle he had fought, the sacrifice that had been made, had not brought the peace he had hoped for. The hotel was gone, its walls shattered and its power broken, but the spirits, the souls of the dead, were still here, lingering in the corners of his mind, in the forgotten spaces of the building. He had stopped Wallace's reign of terror. He had stopped the curse that had bound the souls to this place. But in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. Crescent Manor's legacy had been written in blood, in suffering, and in torment. And no matter how many rituals were performed, no matter how many sacrifices were made, the legacy of Crescent Manor would never truly be erased. It was then that Ethan realized the price of his victory. He had freed the spirits, but in doing so, he had taken on their burden. He was now part of Crescent Manor's legacy. Its history was written into his soul, its ghosts forever bound to his own. He turned away from the lobby, his heart heavy with the weight of the past, the weight of the spirits he had freed, the weight of Lena's sacrifice. He knew there was no going back, no undoing what had been done. The hotel was destroyed, but its presence would forever linger within him. Crescent Manor had claimed its final victim, and that victim was Ethan. But even as he walked away from the ruins of the hotel, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits would always follow him. Crescent Manor had been destroyed, but its legacy would never be forgotten. Some places, some curses, were never meant to be restored. They were meant to be left in the past, to be forgotten, and yet they lived on, haunting the living. Ethan stepped into the night, the echoes of Crescent Manor's ghosts still whispering in the wind. They were free now, but their torment was far from over. And as the cold air wrapped around him, he knew that he would never truly escape the legacy of Crescent Manor. It was with him now, a part of him forever. The story of Crescent Manor is one of eternal struggle, a battle between the living and the dead, and ultimately a tale of sacrifice. Throughout the unfolding events, Ethan Harris, a man seeking to escape the demons of his past, unwittingly becomes entangled in the darkest of forces. What begins as a simple night shift job becomes a journey into the depths of human fear, spiritual torment, and the heavy price of knowledge. With each haunting encounter, Ethan's reality blurs, and he learns that the evil within Crescent Manor is far greater than he could ever have imagined. Wallace Morrow, the cursed spirit, is no longer just a man but an embodiment of darkness, a monstrous force born from the very souls he had sacrificed to power his ambition. The ritual to free the spirits, to undo the curse, comes at a devastating cost. In the end, Lena's sacrifice is the final act of redemption, a courageous decision that allows Ethan to survive but leaves him with the heavy burden of Crescent Manor's legacy. Though the hotel is destroyed and its power broken, the spirits that once haunted it remain, now part of Ethan himself, a reminder that some legacies, some curses, can never truly be erased. No matter how far he runs, Crescent Manor's shadow will always linger over him, a constant reminder of the toll taken by his own actions and the power of the darkness he faced. In the final moments, Ethan's realization is profound. While he may have saved the world from a greater evil, the personal cost is irreversible. The ghosts were freed, but their release doesn't bring peace. Instead, it serves as a reminder of the price of knowledge and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Ethan must live with the legacy of his actions, forever marked by the ghosts he freed and the sacrifice of his ally, Lena. The deep lesson. This story teaches us an invaluable lesson about the choices we make and the consequences they carry. Much like Ethan, many of us are often driven by the desire to understand, to find answers to the questions that haunt us. However, sometimes, the pursuit of knowledge comes with a price we may not be prepared to pay. This tale reminds us that some forces in life are too powerful to control, and there are things that, once unleashed, can never truly be put back into their box. In our lives, we may face situations where we must confront the darkness, whether it be personal challenges, hidden truths, or things from our past that we wish to forget. But like Crescent Manor, these things don't just vanish. They linger, and if we're not careful, they can shape us in ways we never expected. The lesson here is that sometimes the pursuit of answers can come at the cost of something far greater, and the price of peace may be one we're unwilling to pay. We must be mindful of our choices, particularly when they involve matters beyond our control. It's important to understand that the past, with all its ghosts, will eventually catch up with us, and sometimes the right thing to do is to let go, allowing the past to rest in peace, without trying to force its secrets into the light. Engagement question. What do you think about the choices Ethan had to make in this story? Do you believe the price of knowledge and sacrifice is worth it? Or do you think some things are better left unknown? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's engage in a discussion about the deeper lessons we can take from this tale. Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark to support the channel, so we can continue creating chilling and thought-provoking stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support means everything, and it inspires us to bring you even more captivating content. Stay tuned for the next eerie adventure.